Griffin Harlow thought finding out he was a father was the hardest part. He was wrong, because when love gets a second chance, the past doesn't just fade away, it fights back. And sometimes the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. If you haven't watched part 1, stop right here. Go back and watch it first. You need to know how Griffin discovered his twin babies on a plane, how he and Zora reconnected after 2 years of painful separation, and how one breakfast changed everything. This is part 2, and the stakes just got higher. If you're ready for a story about fighting for family when the world tries to tear it apart, hit that like button right now. And if you believe in second chances, real love, and the kind of courage it takes to stand up to the people who think they own you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment. This is where the real test begins. Let's go. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, a scent Griffin would forever associate with hope. He stood at Zora's stove, spatula in hand, flipping pancakes with the careful concentration of a man who rarely cooked but desperately wanted to get it right. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the countertops. Somewhere behind him, Amara babbled cheerfully in her high chair, banging a plastic spoon against the tray like a tiny drummer. Dorian sat on the floor near Griffin's feet, stacking blocks with intense focus occasionally, looking up at the man he'd instinctively called Dada just hours earlier. Griffin still couldn't believe it. That word, so small, so simple, had cracked something open inside him he didn't know existed. Zora emerged from the hallway, hair wrapped in a silk scarf, wearing an oversized t-shirt and leggings. She stopped when she saw him at the stove. "You're making breakfast?" Her voice carried equal parts surprise and amusement. Griffin turned, grinning sheepishly. "Trying to. No promises on quality." She walked over, peering at the pancakes. They were uneven, slightly burned on one edge, but the effort was undeniable. "When did you learn to cook?" "About 20 minutes ago. YouTube is very helpful." He flipped one onto a plate. "I figured, you do this every day, alone. The least I can do is help." Zora felt warmth spread through her chest, but it was quickly followed by something else, nervousness. This felt good. Too good. And the last time something felt this good with Griffin, it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She pulled mugs from the cabinet, busying her hands to quiet her thoughts. "You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to." Griffin plated another pancake, then glanced at her. "Is that okay?" The question was gentle, but it carried weight. He was asking permission to be here, to be present, to be part of this life. It was so different from the man who used to assume his place in everything. Zora nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's okay." They moved around the kitchen in careful synchrony, Griffin finishing breakfast, while Zora poured juice and cut fruit into toddler-sized pieces. It was domestic and quiet, the kind of morning she'd once imagined they'd share. But underneath it all, anxiety hummed in her chest like a low-frequency current she couldn't ignore. Griffin noticed. He always noticed when something was off with her, even after all this time. "You're worried," he said softly, setting down the spatula. Zora didn't deny it. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "I just keep waiting for something to go wrong." Griffin moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands. "This, us, you being here, making pancakes, playing with the twins like it's the most natural thing in the world." Her voice wavered. "It feels good, Griffin, and that scares me." "Why?" "Because it felt good before, too." She met his eyes, vulnerability written across her face. "And then, it didn't. And I don't know if I can survive that again." Griffin's jaw tightened, not in defensiveness, but in understanding. He'd earned this doubt, every ounce of it. "I know I can't just erase the past," he said quietly. "And I know showing up for one morning doesn't prove anything. But Zora..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not here because I feel guilty. I'm here because there's nowhere else I want to be. And I'll prove that to you, every single day. For as long as it takes." Zora searched his face, looking for cracks, for signs of the old Griffin who made promises he couldn't keep. but all she saw was steady determination. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Both of them froze. Zora frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." Griffin's expression shifted, guarded now. He moved toward the door instinctively, but Zora put a hand on his arm. "Let me check." She walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Her stomach dropped. "Oh no." Griffin stepped beside her. "Who is it?" Zora exhaled slowly, dread pooling in her gut. "My mother." Griffin's face went pale. He knew exactly what that meant. Zora unlocked the door and opened it, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. "Mama, hi." Claudette Wright stood on the porch like a force of nature contained in a 5'6" frame. She wore a floral blouse tucked into crisp slacks, her silver-streaked locks pulled back neatly. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. She looked past Zora, directly at Griffin, who stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Mama, I was going to call you." Zora started. "Were you?" Claudette's voice was measured, controlled. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her gaze sweeping the room. She took in the breakfast setup, the twins in their seats, Griffin still holding a spatula like a man caught mid-crime. Her eyes landed on Griffin and stayed there. "Mrs. Wright," Griffin said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from every inch of his body. "It's good to see you." Claudette tilted her head slightly. "Is it?" Zora moved between them, trying to diffuse whatever was about to happen. "Mama, Griffin was just making breakfast. I can see that." Claudette set her purse down on the side table with deliberate slowness. "What I can't see is why he's here at all." Griffin set the spatula down and stepped forward, respectful but not retreating. "I understand why you'd be upset." "Upset?" Claudette's eyebrow arched. "Baby, I'm not upset. I'm confused, because the last time I checked, you signed papers that said you wanted nothing to do with my daughter, and now here you are, playing house like the last 2 years didn't happen." The words landed like stones. Zora winced. "Mama, it's not like that." Claudette held up a hand gently, her eyes never leaving Griffin. "Let him speak." Griffin swallowed hard. This was it. The reckoning he knew was coming. "You're right," he said quietly. "I walked away. I let her go when I should have fought. I was selfish and I was wrong." His voice grew firmer. "But I didn't know about the twins. I swear to you, Mrs. Wright, if I had known Zora was pregnant, I would have been here. I would have done everything differently." Claudette's expression didn't soften. "Would you? Or would you have been too busy closing deals and building empires?" Griffin flinched. The truth of it stung because he couldn't say for certain what the old version of himself would have done. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I would have messed it up back then too, but I'm not that man anymore." "Words," Claudette said simply. "That's all I'm hearing." Griffin nodded slowly. "Then let me show you." "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me prove I've changed." Claudette studied him for a long moment, her gaze unflinching. Then she turned to Zora. "And you? You're okay with this?" Zora glanced at Griffin, then back at her mother. "I'm giving him a chance, Mama. Not because I'm naive, but because Amara and Dorian deserve to know their father. And because—" she took a breath, "because part of me still believes in him." Claudette's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to show the words had landed. She walked over to the high chair, where Amara sat, sticky with syrup, and gently wiped the little girl's hands with a napkin. "These babies are my world," she said softly. "And they're all my daughter had when she had nothing else." She turned back to Griffin, her voice low and deadly serious. "So let me be very clear. If you hurt her again, if you walk away, if you disappear, if you put anything above this family, you won't just answer to her. You'll answer to me. And trust me, Mr. Harlow, I don't care how much money you have or what kind of lawyers you can afford. There is no power on this earth that will protect you from a mother who's watched her child cry herself to sleep." Griffin met her gaze head-on. "I understand. Do you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Completely." Claudette held his stare for 5 long seconds. Then, Finally, she exhaled and turned to Dorian, who had toddled over and was tugging on her pant leg. She scooped him up, her entire demeanor shifting as she kissed his forehead. "Hey, my sweet boy," Dorian giggled, patting her cheeks. Claudette looked back at Griffin one last time. "I'll be watching." Closely. Griffin nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less." For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft sounds of the twins. Then Claudette set Dorian down, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. She paused on the threshold, looking back at Zora. "Call me later." "I will, Mama." The door closed. Zora let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Griffin ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken but standing tall. "That went better than expected," he said weakly. Zora laughed despite herself. "She didn't threaten to kill you, so, yeah, that's a win." Griffin smiled, but the weight of Claudette's words still pressed on his chest. He looked at Zora, standing in the middle of her small kitchen, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her world together by sheer will. "I meant what I said," Griffin told her. "I'm going to prove it, to her, to you, to them." Zora's eyes glistened. "I want to believe that." "Then let me show you." She nodded slowly. And for the first time that morning, the nervousness in her chest eased. Just a little. 3 days of peace. That was all Griffin got before his past came crashing back through the door of his Manhattan office. He'd been working remotely from Atlanta as much as possible, restructuring his schedule, to spend mornings with the twins and evenings helping Zora with bedtime routines. His assistant had been fielding calls, rescheduling meetings, and doing damage control on the questions investors were beginning to ask about his sudden absence from New York. But on Thursday morning, Griffin had flown back for a board meeting he couldn't avoid. He'd promised Zora he'd return that same evening. She'd kissed him at the door, a quick, careful kiss that still made his heart race, and told him to be safe. He should have known his father wouldn't stay silent for long. Richard Harlow didn't knock. He never did. The door to Griffin's corner office swung open with the kind of authority only a man who'd built an empire from nothing could command. He stood in the doorway, tall and imposing in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his silver hair perfectly combed, his cold blue eyes fixed on his son. Griffin looked up from his laptop, his jaw tightening the moment he saw his father's face. He knew that look. It was the same expression Richard wore when he was about to dismantle a competitor or kill a deal he didn't like. "Father." Griffin's voice was flat, controlled. He didn't stand, didn't offer a greeting beyond the single word. Richard closed the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. He didn't sit either. Instead, he stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the New York skyline, as if the city itself owed him something. "You've been distracted," Richard said. It wasn't a question. Griffin leaned back in his chair, refusing to take the bait. "I've been handling my responsibilities." "Have you?" Richard turned, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Because from where I'm standing, my son, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, has been spending an unusual amount of time in Atlanta, missing meetings, delegating responsibilities that shouldn't be delegated." Griffin's fingers drummed once against the armrest of his chair before he stilled them. He wouldn't give his father the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. "I had personal matters to attend to." "Personal matters." Richard repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something bitter. He walked closer, each step measured and deliberate. "I had someone look into these personal matters of yours." Griffin's blood went cold, but his expression remained neutral. Of course his father had him followed. Richard Harlow didn't leave anything to chance. "And what did you find?" Griffin asked, though he already knew the answer. Richard stopped in front of the desk, his hands now resting on the back of the chair across from Griffin. His knuckles were white. "You've been spending time with her." Griffin didn't flinch. "Her name is Zora." "I know her name," Richard snapped, the first crack in his composure showing. "I also know she has 2 children, toddlers." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Twins. The air in the room seemed to thin. Griffin stood slowly, meeting his father's eyes across the desk. Yes. Twins. A boy and a girl. 15 months old. He paused, letting the weight of the next words settle. Your grandchildren. For a moment, Richard said nothing. His face remained stone, but something flickered behind his eyes, shock, maybe, or calculation. It was hard to tell with a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of emotional detachment. Then he laughed. It was a short, humorless sound. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Richard straightened, shaking his head slowly. So she's claiming you're the father. Of course she is. And you just believed her? You didn't demand proof? You didn't think for 1 second that this could be a setup? Griffin's hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice remained steady. I didn't need to demand proof. I've seen them. Held them. They're mine. You don't know that. Griffin's voice rose slightly, the first sign of the anger he'd been keeping locked down. Zora told me she was pregnant 2 years ago. She sent me a letter. Richard's expression didn't change, but Griffin saw it. The briefest hesitation, the slight shift in his posture. I never got that letter, Griffin continued, his voice quieter now but no less intense. But you did, didn't you? Richard's silence was answer enough. Griffin felt something break inside him, not with sadness, but with a clarity so sharp it hurt. You intercepted it. You kept it from me. I protected you, Richard said, his tone measured again, as if explaining a simple business decision. That woman was a distraction then, and she's a distraction now. You were on the verge of finalizing deals worth hundreds of millions. I wasn't going to let her derail everything we'd built over some pregnancy claim. It wasn't a claim. Griffin's voice cracked through the office like a whip. She was carrying my children, and you kept that from me. You stole 2 years of their lives from me. Richard's face hardened. I did what any father would do. I protected my son from a gold digger who saw an opportunity. Don't. Griffin's voice was low, lethal. Don't you dare call her that. Richard's eyes narrowed. She got her claws back into you already. I should have known. Griffin moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. He was taller than his father now, broader, but Richard didn't back down. Let me make something very clear, Griffin said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Zora is the mother of my children. She raised them alone while I was here. Blind and stupid, because you decided I didn't deserve to know. And now that I do know, I'm going to be the father they deserve. Whether you like it or not. Richard's jaw clenched. You're going to throw away everything, again? I'm not throwing away anything. I'm choosing my family. Those children aren't your family, Richard shot back. They're strangers. You don't even know if they're really yours. They are. Prove it then. Get a paternity test. Protect yourself legally, because if they are yours, she's going to come after you for child support. For a piece of this company, for everything she can get her hands on. She doesn't want my money. Griffin's voice echoed off the glass walls. She never did. She's been raising them on her own because she's stronger than either of us ever gave her credit for. Richard stared at his son, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was colder than Griffin had ever heard it. If you pursue this, if you legitimize those children and tie yourself to that woman, I will make sure you regret it. Griffin went very still. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Richard straightened his tie, his composure fully restored. I've spent 40 years building the Harlow name into something that matters. I won't let you destroy it, because you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. What are you going to do? Griffin asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Disown me. Cut me out of the company. If I have to. Richard moved toward the door, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. But I'd rather not. So I'm giving you a choice, Griffin. Walk away from her and those children, or I'll do it for you. Griffin's blood turned to ice. You can't. I can, and I will. Richard opened the door. You have until the end of the week to make the right decision. The door closed behind him. Griffin stood frozen in the middle of his office, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His father had just threatened to take his children away, to use his power, his connections, his money to rip apart the fragile family Griffin had just started to build. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking, and was about to call his lawyer when he heard it. A soft knock. Griffin looked up. The door to the adjacent conference room, connected to his office by an interior door he rarely used, was cracked open. And standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear, was Zora. She'd flown to New York to surprise him. Her mother had agreed to watch. The twins, to bring him lunch and show him she was trying too. And she'd heard everything. Zora. Griffin started, but the look on her face stopped him cold. She'd heard Richard's threats. She'd heard the venom in his voice. She'd heard the promise to take her children. And Griffin saw it happen in real time. The walls she'd been slowly lowering. Over the past few days, shot back up, fear flooding her eyes. "He's going to try to take them," she whispered. Griffin crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching for her. "He won't. I won't let him." But Zora stepped back, her arms wrapping around herself protectively. "You heard him, Griffin. He has power, money, connections. What do I have?" "You have me," Griffin said desperately. "You have me, and I will fight him. I swear." "You fought him before," Zora said, her voice breaking. "And he won. He kept that letter from you. He controlled you then, and he thinks he can control you now. He can't. Not anymore." Zora looked at him, and Griffin saw all the progress they'd made crumbling in her eyes. The trust they'd been rebuilding, the hope they'd started to share, it was slipping away, replaced by the same fear that had kept them apart for 2 years. "I can't lose them," she said, tears spilling over. "They're all I have." Griffin's heart shattered. "You have me too." But Zora shook her head, backing toward the door. "I need to go." "Zora, wait. I need to think." Her voice was barely a whisper. I need to think." She turned and walked out, leaving Griffin standing alone in his office, the ghost of his father's threats still hanging in the air. And for the first time since he'd found out about his children, Griffin felt true fear. Not fear of losing a company or a fortune, fear of losing the only thing that had ever really mattered. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through the mail slot like a knife between ribs. Zora had just put the twins down for their afternoon nap. Amara had fought sleep as usual, fussing and reaching for her mother until exhaustion finally won. Dorian had gone down easier, his little thumb in his mouth, clutching the blue blanket he couldn't sleep without. The house was quiet, peaceful. Zora had been looking forward to 20 minutes of silence, maybe a cup of tea, maybe just the chance to sit without someone needing her. She saw the envelope on the floor by the door, thick, official looking, her name typed across the front in bold black letters. Her stomach turned before she even picked it up. The return address made her blood run cold. Harlow and Klein, attorneys at law. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The letter inside was printed on expensive letterhead, the kind that screamed money and power. She read the first line and had to sit down. Emergency petition for custody evaluation and grandparental rights in the matter of minors Amara Harlow and Dorian Harlow. The words blurred. She blinked hard, forcing herself to focus, to read the legal language that felt designed to confuse and intimidate. Richard Harlow was suing her, not for full custody, not yet, but for a court-ordered evaluation. He was claiming she'd hidden the twins from their father, claiming she was unfit, claiming the children needed to be assessed by a neutral party to determine their best interests. And buried in the third paragraph, in language so clinical it made her sick, was the worst part, a request for the twins to be placed in temporary guardianship, pending DNA testing, and a formal custody hearing. He wanted to take her babies. The paper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor. Zora couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, her vision narrowed, and suddenly she was gasping, her whole body shaking. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers and called Griffin. He answered on the first ring. "Zora, what's wrong?" She tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. "Zora, talk to me. He's suing me." Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Your father. He's trying to take them." Silence on the other end. Then Griffin's voice, low and tight. "I'm on my way." Griffin made it to Atlanta in under 3 hours. He walked through Zora's door like a man ready to go to war, his face set, in hard lines, his eyes burning with a fury she'd never seen before. Zora sat on the couch, the letter in her lap, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the threat had physically diminished her. Griffin knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Look at me." She did, her eyes red and swollen. "He's not going to win," Griffin said, his voice steady and absolute. "I don't care what he thinks he can do. He's not taking our children. He has lawyers, Griffin, expensive ones. And he's Richard Harlow. He has connections, influence equal to—" "So do I." Griffin squeezed her hands. "And more importantly, we have the truth. You didn't hide the twins from me. You reached out, and he intercepted that letter. We can prove it." Zora shook her head, tears spilling over again. "What if that's not enough? What if the court doesn't care? What if they think I should have tried harder, done more?" "Stop." Griffin's voice was firm but gentle. "You did nothing wrong. You were protecting yourself and our children the best way you knew how. No judge is going to punish you for that." Zora wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But fear had its claws in her, and it wasn't letting go. By that evening, they sat in the office of Simone Carr, the family attorney Griffin had hired within an hour of Zora's call. Simone was a black woman in her early 50s, sharply dressed, with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for destroying opponents in court. She read through the petition carefully, her expression neutral, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at them both. "This is a power play," Simone said bluntly. "Richard Harlow doesn't want custody of 2 toddlers. He wants control. Over you, Griffin. Over the situation, over the narrative." Griffin leaned forward. "Can he win?" Simone tilted her head, considering. "If you'd actually hidden the children and refused to acknowledge paternity, maybe. But that's not what happened. You didn't know they existed because his interference kept that information from you." She tapped the letter. "That works in our favor. Heavily. So what do we do?" Zora asked, her voice small. "We fight back," Simone said. "We file a response denying his claims. We provide evidence, the certified mail receipt from the letter you sent, testimony establishing the timeline, character witnesses. We show the court that you're a fit mother, that Griffin is a committed father, and that Richard's petition is baseless." Griffin nodded. "How long will this take?" "Depends on the judge. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. But in the meantime, there's no immediate threat. The petition requests an evaluation, not an emergency removal. That means the twins stay with Zora." Relief flooded Zora's face, but it was short-lived. Simone's expression grew more serious. "However, I need to be honest with you both. This is going to get ugly. Richard Harlow will dig into everything. Your marriage, your divorce, your finances, your personal lives. He'll try to paint you, Zora, as manipulative or unstable. And, Griffin, he'll try to paint you as an absent father who's only involved now because you got caught." Zora felt the air leave her lungs. Griffin's jaw tightened. "Let him try." Simone looked between them. "I need to know you're both prepared for this, because once we file our response, there's no going back. This becomes a public court battle." Griffin turned to Zora. "I'm ready. Are you?" Zora looked at him. This man who'd walked back into her life just days ago, who'd promised to fight for them, who was staring down his own father to protect their family. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe they could survive this. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious. "I need time to think," she said quietly. Griffin's face fell. "Zora, She stood abruptly, her hands shaking. "I need to process this. I need to figure out what's best for Amara and Dorian." "We fight," Griffin said, standing with her. "That's what's best. We fight together. But Zora stepped back, her arms crossing protectively over her chest. What if fighting makes it worse? What if we go to court and it gets dragged out and the twins get caught in the middle of some custody war? Her voice broke. What if I lose them because I chose to fight? You won't lose them, Griffin said desperately. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. The words burst out of her, loud and raw. You can't control what a judge decides. You can't control your father. You couldn't even control what happened 2 years ago when he kept that letter from you. The accusation hung between them, sharp and cutting. Griffin looked like she'd struck him. That's not fair. Maybe not, Zora whispered, tears streaming down her face. But it's true. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. Simone watched quietly, her professional mask firmly in place. Where are you going? Griffin asked. Home, to my kids. Zora paused at the door, not turning around. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. Zora, please. But she was already gone. Griffin stood in the attorney's office, his hands clenched at his sides, feeling the foundation they'd been building crack beneath his feet. And for the first time since he'd found out about the twins, he wondered if love would be enough. Let me pause here for just a second. If you're feeling what Griffin's feeling right now, that fear that everything you're fighting for might slip away, leave a like on this video and drop a comment telling me, have you ever had to fight for something when the odds were stacked against you? When people with more power tried to take what mattered most, because that's where this story is heading. The fight isn't over. In fact, it's about to get worse before it gets better. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how Griffin and Zora survive what's coming next. Because trust me, Richard Harlow isn't done. And what happens in the next chapter will test everything they've built. Griffin didn't call, didn't text, didn't demand answers. Instead, he showed up. The next morning, at 7 o'clock, Zora opened her door to find him standing on her porch, holding 2 coffees and a bag of bagels. His eyes were tired, shadowed with a sleepless night, but his expression was calm. I'm not here to pressure you, he said quietly. I'm just here. Zora wanted to be angry, wanted to hold on to the fear and doubt that had consumed her since the letter arrived. But looking at him standing there, rumpled shirt, hair slightly messy, eyes full of quiet determination, she couldn't find the strength to push him away. She stepped aside and let him in. That became the pattern. Every morning, Griffin arrived. He brought breakfast, helped with the twins, and stayed until they went down for their naps. Then he'd leave, giving Zora space, only to return in time for dinner. He didn't ask about the lawsuit, didn't push her to make decisions. He just existed in their world, steady and present, like he was trying to prove through action what words couldn't convey. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, Zora's walls began to lower. On the 3rd morning, Griffin sat cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully, building a tower of soft blocks, while Dorian watched with intense concentration. The little boy's face was scrunched in focus, his tongue poking out slightly the way it always did when he was thinking hard. Okay, buddy, Griffin said softly, holding out a red block. Your turn. Put it on top. Dorian took the block with both hands, lifting it carefully toward the tower. His movements were unsteady, his little arms shaking with effort. The block wobbled, tipped, and the whole tower collapsed. Dorian's face crumpled, his lower lip trembling. Griffin didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy into his lap, holding him close. Hey, it's okay. You know what? I knocked down towers all the time when I was learning. Want to know a secret? Dorian sniffled, looking up at his father with watery eyes. The fun part isn't keeping it standing, Griffin whispered conspiratorially. It's knocking it down and starting over. Watch. He rebuilt the tower quickly, then handed Dorian another block. Now, smash it. Dorian's eyes widened. Then a grin broke across his face. He slammed the block down, sending the tower flying. He dissolved into giggles, clapping his hands. Griffin laughed, the sound rich and genuine. See? Much better. From the kitchen doorway, Zora watched, a dish towel in her hands. Something in her chest tightened. Not with fear this time, but with something warmer. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Griffin looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, a little self-conscious. "We're making a mess. Sorry." "It's fine," she said softly. "He loves it." "He's got a good arm," Griffin said, ruffling Dorian's curls. "Might have a future in baseball." Zora smiled despite herself. "Or demolition." Griffin grinned. That too. The moment hung between them, gentle and unforced. Then Amara toddled over, holding her stuffed bunny by one ear, and climbed directly into Griffin's lap beside her brother. Griffin adjusted easily, making room for both of them, one arm around each toddler. Amara stuck her thumb in her mouth and leaned against his chest, content. Dorian grabbed a block and offered it to Griffin with a proud smile, and Zora realized with sudden clarity this was what she'd wanted all along. Not wealth or grand gestures. Just this, a father who showed up, who sat on the floor and built towers and held his children like they were the most important thing in the world. Because to him, they were. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Zora and Griffin sat on the back porch. The Atlanta night was warm, the air thick with humidity and the sound of crickets. They'd fallen into this routine too, quiet conversations after the chaos of the day, neither of them quite ready to say goodnight. Zora cradled a mug of tea, her legs tucked beneath her. Griffin sat in the chair beside hers, close but not crowding. "I'm sorry," Zora said suddenly. Griffin looked over. "For what?" "For what I said at the lawyer's office. About you not being able to control what happened before." She stared into her tea. "That wasn't fair." "It was true, though," Griffin said quietly. "I didn't control it. I let my father pull strings, and you and the twins paid the price." Zora shook her head. "You didn't know. And I chose not to push harder. We both made mistakes." Griffin was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. "When we were married, I thought providing for you was the same as loving you. I thought if I built something big enough, successful enough, it would prove I was worthy of you." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out I had it backwards." Zora looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You never needed me to be a billionaire," Griffin said, meeting her eyes. "You just needed me to be present, to choose you, and I didn't." His voice cracked slightly. "I won't make that mistake again." Zora felt tears prick her eyes. "I want to believe that." "Then let me show you," Griffin said. "Every single day. For as long as it takes." She held his gaze, searching for doubt, for cracks. But all she saw was steady, unwavering commitment. "Okay," she whispered. Griffin exhaled, relief washing over his face. "Okay." The next morning, Griffin arrived with breakfast as usual. But this time, he also carried a black binder under his arm. Zora eyed it curiously as she poured coffee. "What's that?" Griffin set it on the kitchen table, suddenly looking almost shy. "Something I've been working on." "Can I show you?" Intrigued, Zora sat down. Griffin opened the binder, revealing neatly organized pages, printed schedules, handwritten notes, color-coded tabs. "I made us a family plan," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I know it's probably over the top, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I documented everything." Zora flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. There were sections on the twins, routines, feeding schedules, nap times, favorite songs, notes on their preferences. Amara likes her milk warm. Dorian won't eat peas. Both need the nightlight on. There were CO, parenting logistics, proposed schedules, backup plans, emergency contacts. But then there were other pages, personal ones. Zora's coffee, oat milk, 1 sugar. She hums when she's nervous. She likes old jazz on Sunday mornings. Date ideas, when she's ready. Botanical gardens, cooking class. That Italian place she mentioned once. Zora's throat tightened. Her fingers traced the handwriting, his handwriting, careful and deliberate. "You documented my coffee order," she said, her voice thick. Griffin rubbed the back of his neck. "I documented everything. Because I don't want to forget. I don't want to take anything for granted ever again." Zora looked up at him, tears spilling over. You made a binder. I know it's probably weird. It's perfect, she interrupted, her voice breaking. Griffin, this is... No one's ever... She couldn't finish. She just stood and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Griffin held her, his hand gentle on her back. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured into her hair. I promise. And for the first time since that letter arrived, Zora let herself believe him. The story broke on a Friday morning, timed perfectly to dominate the news cycle through the weekend. Tech billionaire Griffin Harlowe's secret family, love child scandal rocks Harlowe Industries. The headline appeared first on a major financial news site, then spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, it was everywhere. Business networks, gossip blogs, Twitter trending topics. Photos accompanied the articles, blurry shots of Griffin entering Zora's townhouse, long, lens captures of her, pushing the twins in a stroller, screenshots of public records showing the divorce filing from 2 years prior. The narrative was vicious and calculated. Griffin Harlowe, billionaire CEO, had abandoned his pregnant ex-wife and was only now acknowledging his children after being caught. Or, depending on which outlet you read, Zora had trapped him with a pregnancy and hidden the twins to extort him later. Either way, the story painted her as manipulative and him as reckless. And Richard Harlowe's fingerprints were all over it. Zora's phone started buzzing at 6 in the morning. Text messages from old college friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Emails from reporters requesting interviews. Notifications from social media apps she barely used, alerting her that she'd been tagged hundreds of times. She opened Twitter and immediately wished she hadn't. The attacks were relentless. Strangers who knew nothing about her life felt entitled to dissect every choice she'd made. They called her a gold digger, a liar, worse names that made her stomach turn. Someone had found her LinkedIn profile and posted screenshots, mocking her job as a graphic designer. She's after his money, one comment read, with thousands of likes. This is why you don't mess with billionaires. She probably planned this from the start. Photos of her, ones she didn't even know existed, were being shared and picked apart. Her appearance criticized. Her neighborhood called run to down. Her worth as a mother questioned by people who'd never met her children. Zora sat on her couch, her hands shaking, scrolling through an endless feed of strangers hating her. She'd known this could happen. Richard had threatened as much. But knowing and experiencing were two entirely different things. Her phone rang. Griffin's name flashed on the screen. She answered, her voice hollow. Have you seen it? I'm handling it, Griffin said immediately. His voice was tight, controlled fury barely held in check. Don't read the comments. Don't respond to anyone. I'm going to fix this. How? Zora asked, tears already forming. They're saying I trapped you, that I hid your children for money. How do you fix that? By telling the truth, Griffin said. Publicly. Griffin, no. I'm not letting them do this to you, he interrupted. I'm holding a press conference this afternoon. I'm going to set the record straight. Zora's heart clenched. If you do that, it'll make things worse for you. Your investors, your board, they'll... I don't care. The certainty in his voice stopped her. I don't care what they think, Griffin continued, quieter now but no less firm. I care about you, about our family, and I'm not going to sit back and let my father destroy you to get to me. Zora closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Okay, I'll call you after, Griffin said. And Zora, turn off your phone. Don't look at any of it. Please. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Griffin stood in front of a room full of reporters, cameras and microphones. His publicist had advised against this. His lawyers had warned him it could backfire. His board of directors had sent thinly veiled threats about protecting the company's reputation. Griffin didn't care. He wore a suit, but he'd loosened his tie. His expression was serious, his jaw set. He looked directly into the cameras and began. My name is Griffin Harlowe, and I'm here to address the false narratives being spread about Zora Wright and my children. The room went silent. 2 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, Griffin continued, his voice steady. I allowed my career to consume me. I neglected my marriage to a woman who deserved far better. And when she left, I was too proud and too foolish to fight for her. He paused, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. What I didn't know, what I only recently discovered, is that Zora was pregnant when she left. She reached out to inform me. She sent a letter to my office. I never received it. A reporter shouted a question, but Griffin kept going. I didn't receive it because it was intercepted, hidden from me, and for 15 months I had no idea I was a father. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The accusations you've read, that Zora hid our children from me, that she's seeking money or manipulating the situation, are lies, Griffin said, his voice rising with controlled anger. Zora raised our twins alone. She worked, she sacrificed, she asked me for nothing. Not during our divorce, and not now. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fierce. She is one of the strongest, most principled people I've ever known. And the fact that anyone would attack her character, people who have never met her, who know nothing about what she's endured, is shameful. The room erupted with questions, but Griffin raised a hand. I'm not finished, he said. I'm also here to address my investors and board members directly. Every camera focused tighter. I've received calls today suggesting I distance myself from this situation to protect the company's image. I've been advised to issue a neutral statement and let the legal process handle it quietly. He straightened, his voice like steel. I'm not doing that. A reporter's eyes widened. My family is not a liability to be managed, Griffin said. They are my priority, and if that costs me business relationships or investor confidence, so be it. I'd rather lose every dollar I have than lose them. The room was dead silent. Griffin's voice softened just slightly. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations for the next several weeks to focus on my children and co-parenting with Zora. The company will continue under capable leadership, but I will not sacrifice my family for profit. Not again. He stepped away from the podium as the room exploded with shouted questions. Zora watched the press conference from her living room, her phone clutched in her hand despite Griffin's advice to turn it off. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to him defend her, as she watched him choose her, publicly, irrevocably, in front of the entire world. He just put everything on the line. His reputation, his business, his carefully maintained image as the untouchable billionaire CEO. For her, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Wright? This is Trevor Castellan. Zora's breath caught. Castellan. As in the Castellan merger, Griffin had been working on for months. The deal that was supposed to be worth hundreds of millions. Mr. Harlow just walked away from our negotiation table, Castellan said. His voice was measured, businesslike. He said his family was more important than closing our deal. Zora's heart sank. I'm sorry. Don't be, Castellan interrupted. I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never seen a man willing to sacrifice that much for his principles. It impressed me. He paused. Tell Griffin to call me when he's ready. We'll restructure the timeline. Family comes first. The line went dead. Zora sat in stunned silence, staring at her phone. Griffin had been willing to lose everything, and somehow in doing so, he'd gained respect instead. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Griffin. I meant every word. Are you okay? She typed back through tears. Thank you. For everything. His response came immediately. I'm coming over. I need to see you. Zora set down her phone and let herself cry, not from fear or sadness this time, but from overwhelming relief. Griffin had proven himself in the most public way possible. And finally, she let herself believe he wasn't going anywhere. The first thing Griffin did after the court hearing was call an emergency board meeting. He walked into the Harlow Industries conference room, 8 hours later, with a single folder under his arm and a decision that had been 2 years in the making. 15 board members sat around the glass table, Richard among them, his face a mask of controlled fury. Griffin didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table and opened the folder. Effective immediately, I'm exercising my majority shareholder rights to remove Richard Harlow from the board of directors, Griffin said, his voice calm and absolute. I'm also terminating any advisory roles, consulting positions, or access to company operations he currently holds. The room went silent. Richard stood slowly, his hands flat on the table. You're making a mistake. No, Griffin said, meeting his father's eyes without flinching. The mistake was letting you have control for this long. You used this company to manipulate my life. You hid information about my children. You tried to destroy the woman I love. His voice hardened. You're done. Richard's jaw clenched. I built this company. And I'm grateful for that, Griffin interrupted. But you don't own me. You don't own my choices. And you certainly don't own my family. He slid a document across the table. This is a formal severance agreement. You'll retain your shares, but you'll have no operational involvement. Sign it, or I'll force a vote. Either way, you're out. The other board members exchanged glances. No one spoke. Richard stared at his son for a long moment, then picked up the pen and signed with a single harsh stroke. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked to the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back. You'll regret this. Griffin shook his head. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. Richard left without another word. When the door closed, Griffin exhaled slowly. His hands were shaking, but his chest felt lighter than it had in years. He was finally free. Zora heard about it that evening, when Griffin showed up at her door with takeout and a tired smile. You really did it? She asked, letting him inside. I really did, Griffin said, setting the food on the kitchen counter. He's out. Completely. Zora studied his face, looking for regret or doubt. She found neither. How do you feel? Griffin considered the question. Relieved, lighter, like I finally took control of my own life. He looked at her. He doesn't get to hurt us anymore. Zora moved closer, placing her hand over his. I'm proud of you. Griffin's eyes softened. Those 4 words meant more to him than any business victory ever had. The following week, Claudette came to visit. She arrived unannounced, as was becoming her habit, but this time her expression was different, less guarded. She carried a casserole dish covered in foil and a small gift bag. Zora opened the door, surprised. Mama, you didn't have to bring anything. I wanted to, Claudette said simply. She stepped inside and looked around. Where's Griffin? In the backyard with the twins. Why? Claudette set down the casserole and walked to the back door. Through the glass, she could see Griffin on his knees in the grass, helping. Dorian chased bubbles while Amara sat nearby, clapping every time one popped. Claudette watched for a long moment. Then she turned to Zora. He's here a lot. Every day, Zora confirmed. And he's good with them. He's wonderful with them. Claudette nodded slowly. I heard what he did, cutting his father out, standing up in court. She looked at her daughter. That took courage. Zora felt tears prick her eyes. He's changed, Mama. I can see that. Claudette walked to the back door and opened it. Griffin, can you come here for a minute? Griffin looked up, immediately wary. He handed Dorian to Zora and walked over, wiping grass off his jeans. Mrs. Wright. Claudette studied him for a moment. Then she held out the gift bag. This is for you. Griffin took it, confused. He opened it carefully and pulled out a framed photo. It was a picture of him with the twins from last week. Amara on his shoulders, Dorian in his arms, all 3 of them laughing. Zora sent it to me, Claudette said. I had it framed. Griffin's throat tightened. Thank you. Claudette crossed her arms, but her expression had softened. I'm not saying I've forgotten what happened before, but I see you trying. I see you showing up. She paused. And I see my daughter smiling again. So, keep doing what you're doing. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was acceptance, and for Griffin, it was everything. I will, he said, his voice thick. I promise. Claudette nodded. Then, unexpectedly, she stepped forward and hugged him briefly. Don't make me regret this. Griffin hugged her back. I won't. When she pulled away, she looked at Zora. Now, let's eat before that casserole gets cold. 2 weeks later, Griffin signed a lease on a townhouse 4 doors down from Zora's. You're moving to my street? Zora asked when he told her, half laughing, half shocked. Too close? Griffin asked, suddenly uncertain. No, Zora said quickly. No, it's perfect. I just didn't expect. I want to be near them, Griffin said. Near you. But I don't want to pressure you by moving in before you're ready. This way I can be here in 2 minutes if you need me. But you still have your space. Zora looked at him. This man who was learning to balance presence with respect, commitment with patience. Thank you, she said softly. Griffin moved in the following weekend. Zora helped him unpack boxes while the twins helped by pulling out pots and pans and banging them together like drums. It felt natural, like they were building something new, brick by brick. The milestone moment came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Zora was folding laundry in the living room while Griffin played with the twins on the floor. Dorian was stacking blocks again, his new obsession. Amara was attempting to stand on her own, without holding on to anything. She'd been close for weeks, taking a few wobbling steps before sitting down hard. But this time, she stood completely upright, arms out for balance. Zora, Griffin whispered urgently. Look. Zora turned just as Amara took 1 step, then 2, then 3, 4, 5, walking on her own for the first time, a huge grin on her face. Oh my God, Zora breathed, dropping the laundry. Amara made it all the way across the room before plopping down in Griffin's lap, squealing with delight. Griffin scooped her up, laughing, his eyes wet. You did it. You walked. Dorian, not to be outdone, abandoned his blocks and stood up too. He took 3 shaky steps toward Zora before tumbling into her arms. Both of them, Zora said, laughing and crying at the same time. They're both walking. Griffin looked at her across the room, holding Amara while she held Dorian, and something passed between them, a shared moment of pure joy, the kind that only parents understand. We're watching them grow up, Griffin said quietly. Together, Zora added. Together, Griffin agreed. That night, after the twins were asleep, Zora and Griffin sat on her porch as they did most evenings now. The Atlanta night was warm, the stars faint behind the glow of city lights. Griffin reached over and took Zora's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his. I never thought we'd get here, Zora said softly. Neither did I, Griffin admitted. But I'm grateful we did. Zora turned to look at him. I forgive you. For before. For everything. Griffin's breath caught. Zora, I mean it, she continued. You've proven yourself. Every single day. And I don't want to keep holding the past between us anymore. Griffin lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I love you. I never stopped. I love you too, Zora whispered. And when he leaned in to kiss her, soft and slow and full of promise, Zora kissed him back without fear, because this time she knew he was staying. 9 months passed like pages in a book, each one filled with small moments that built into something beautiful. Griffin showed up every morning. He learned to make pancakes without burning them, mastered the art of changing diapers with 1 hand, and could recite every word of the twins' favorite bedtime stories from memory. He and Zora fell into a rhythm that felt less like co-parenting and more like partnership. And when the twins' 2nd birthday arrived, it felt right to celebrate as a family. Zora's backyard was transformed into a children's wonderland. Balloons in primary colors bobbed against the fence. A small inflatable bounce house dominated one corner. A table overflowed with fruit, sandwiches, and a 2-tiered cake decorated with cartoon animals. Claudette arrived early, taking charge of the kitchen with the ease of a woman who'd hosted countless family gatherings. A handful of Zora's close friends came with their own children. Griffin's assistant sent a massive gift basket. Even Simone Carr stopped by briefly, bringing books for the twins and a knowing smile for Griffin and Zora. The twins were in heaven. Amara wore a pink tutu and a plastic tiara, running in circles until she got dizzy. Dorian stuffed his face with cake, ending up with frosting in his hair and all over his shirt. Griffin chased them both around the yard, letting them climb on him like a human jungle gym. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, his hair messy from Amara's sticky hands, and he'd never looked happier. Zora watched from the porch steps, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd dreamed of 2 years ago, when she'd held her newborn babies alone in a hospital room. This chaos, this laughter, this sense of completeness. Claudette sat down beside her, handing her a glass of lemonade. "You picked a good one," she said, nodding toward Griffin, who was currently being tackled by both twins. Zora smiled. "I did. Twice." Claudette raised her glass. "Here's to second chances." They clinked glasses and drank. By evening, the guests had filtered out one by one. The yard was littered with deflated balloons and wrapping paper. The twins, exhausted from excitement, had crashed hard, both asleep in their cribs by 7 o'clock. Zora stood in the quiet kitchen, loading the dishwasher, when Griffin came up behind her. "Leave it," he said softly. "I'll clean up tomorrow." "You sure?" "Positive." He took the plate from her hands and set it in the sink. "Come outside with me for a minute." Zora followed him to the back porch. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues. Fireflies blinked lazily in the grass. The air smelled like summer and possibility. Griffin stood at the porch railing, his hands gripping the wood. Zora could tell he was nervous. His shoulders were tense, his breathing deliberate. "You okay?" she asked. He turned to face her. "There's something I need to say." Zora's heart skipped. "Okay." Griffin took her hands in his, holding them gently. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. 2 years ago, I stood in front of a judge and signed papers that ended our marriage, he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. It was the worst day of my life, not because of what I lost, though I lost everything that mattered, but because I knew it was my fault. I'd broken something beautiful because I was too blind and too proud to see what I had. Zora's eyes filled with tears. "When I saw you on that plane," Griffin continued, "I thought maybe, just maybe, fate was giving me a second chance. And then I found out about Amara and Dorian, and I realized the second chance wasn't just about us. It was about becoming the man I should have been all along." He paused, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "You didn't owe me anything, Zora. You could have shut me out, told me I'd lost my chance. But you didn't. You let me in. You let me prove myself, and every single day you've given me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me, the chance to be a father, to be your partner, to be part of this family." A tear slipped down Zora's cheek. Griffin released one of her hands and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band with a single diamond. Elegant, understated, perfect. He dropped to one knee. Zora's breath caught, her free hand covering her mouth. "I'm not the same man who let you go," Griffin said, looking up at her with eyes full of love and certainty. "I've learned what matters. I've learned that you don't build a life in boardrooms or bank accounts. You build it in moments like this, in sticky kisses from toddlers, in late-night conversations on porches, in choosing the people you love over and over again, every single day." His voice cracked slightly. "Zora Aaliyah Wright, you are the strongest, most beautiful, most incredible woman I've ever known. You're an amazing mother. You're my best friend. And you're the only person I want to spend the rest of my life with." He held up the ring. "Marry me." Again, not because of the twins, though I'm grateful for them every second, but because I love you, because I choose you, because I want to wake up every morning and choose you again. Zora was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Marry me," Griffin said again, his own eyes wet. "Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." For a moment, Zora couldn't speak. Her heart was too full, her emotions too overwhelming. She looked at this man kneeling before her, humbled, sincere, completely hers. She thought about everything they'd been through, the heartbreak, the separation, the fear and doubt and painful rebuilding. She thought about how he'd shown up every single day, how he'd fought his own father to protect their family, how he'd chosen them over everything else. And she knew with absolute certainty what her answer was. Yes, she whispered. Griffin's face broke into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen. Yes, Zora said again, louder this time, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Griffin stood and slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. It was a kiss full of promise, of forgiveness, of a future they'd fought so hard to build. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. I love you, Griffin said, pressing his forehead to hers. I love you too, Zora replied. So much. They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, the Georgia night warm around them. Inside the house, through the baby monitor clipped to Zora's pocket, they heard a soft sound, Dorian shifting in his sleep, Amara's gentle breathing. Their children, their family. Griffin pulled back just enough to look at her. We're really doing this, Zora smiled, her hand resting over his heart. We really are. And in that moment, everything that had been broken was whole again. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, and worth fighting for. Love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to make things right when you do. Griffin and Zora's story didn't end with a proposal. It continued in the everyday choices they made to show up for each other, to put family first, to choose love even when it was hard. Because second chances aren't given. They're earned. And sometimes, the best love stories are the ones that get a chance to begin again. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let me know in the comments, do you believe in second chances? Have you ever had to fight for love when everything seemed lost? I want to hear your story. And if you're here for more stories like this, real, emotional, filled with lessons about love, family and redemption, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next one.